That's enough out of you. A weekly podcast where you'll hear the truth, or at least a closer version of the truth than most of the bullshit that's out there. Here are your hosts, Bill Rader and Sean Kane.
Hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader.
And I'm Sean Kane.
And this is a weekly podcast where we talk about a veritable potpourri of topics. We talk about sports, we talk about history, we talk about sports history, we talk about historical events and historical figures, and we talk about pop culture.
We talk about whatever we want, Billy, because it's our show, buddy.
And what a show it is.
We're getting a lot of feedback, buddy, and the audience is building. It's just great, buddy.
It is great. I can't thank our audience enough for listening and participating and giving us feedback and subscribing. It's a lot more than what I anticipated. I thought maybe, if we got a couple of people who were interested in the show, that'd be cool. But yeah, we have a pretty good following, and it's really cool. So anyway, Sean, Happy New Year. This is our first show of the new year, even though we're recording in December.
Happy New Year to you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. It's always after the holidays. It's like, all right, we got the NFL, playoffs and the Super Bowl, and that's cool. And then after that, it's just like, it's just snow and cold and dark and disgusting until the spring.
Yeah, you're counting down the days until winter's over, buddy.
But hey, what are you gonna do? That's comes with the territory, right? If we didn't want winter, we'd move to a warm state.
You better believe it, buddy. Like the change of seasons.
I like it. I do. I enjoy. To me, fall is the best season. I just like it when it gets a little bit cooler out, and
I like fall. I kind of like spring too, buddy.
Yeah.
Once it really turns,
Yeah. Well, it's the transition seasons, I guess, right? Anyway, we got a fantastic show. In fact, a couple of shows for you guys. We said we were going to start the new year off with an historical event, a series of shows about an historical event. And this isn't actually even the one we were thinking of, but we're going to do today's show and next week's show on, I think you might have heard of this. It's called the Vietnam War.
Yeah, we threw a little curveball in here, Bill.
Yeah, we were going to, so the next, so we'll do another series after this for historical event, but we're not going to tell you what that is just yet, but this one is going to be on Vietnam. And I know, Sean, you've been doing a ton of research. You've been just gathering stuff like crazy, and you're really excited about this topic.
Oh, Bill, I'm fired up for this one, buddy, because there's so much disinformation. I mean, we're going to get the truth out tonight, buddy. And all the disinformation creatures that are out there, buddy, I'm going to call them all out tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were both too young to really remember when Vietnam was going on.
Sure.
But it was such a long lasting effect on this country and the people who were obviously affected by it, whether it be a family who lost somebody or the soldiers who came back. And we'll get into all that, but really significant. I know my parents, I mean, I'll just right off the bat, I'll tell you, my dad was drafted and went into the reserves and never saw any combat or anything like that. But it was scary. I know he was really scared he was going to end up having to go.
Well, Bill, it's personal to me because, my family, we have a long history of military service and, you could protest the war because I don't think, anybody could say anything other than the Vietnam War was the worst foreign policy disaster in American history.
Right.
I mean, but, don't protest against the soldiers. You know what I mean? The soldiers should be hailed as heroes and not come home to be called, baby killers and spit on. And, and that's what really bothers me because, my dad served during the Vietnam era. A lot of my uncles served. My Uncle Frank served during that. I know Uncle Murph served during the Vietnam era.
Yep.
I had a lot of uncles. My Uncle Jimmy saw a lot of combat. He wasn't in Vietnam, but he was in the Navy at the end of World War II. And then he was in the Marine infantry in Korean War. And he saw a lot of combat, and he ended up earning the Purple Heart, so
Yeah.
and my cousin Brian is in the Marines right now. So we have a long history of military service, and the soldiers should be hailed as heroes. Protest the war, but don't protest the soldiers. Protest the government that put the kids there,
Yeah.
and the rich people that made money off it, the businessmen.
Totally agree. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it, Sean. Let's talk about Vietnam.
All right, Billy, let's get into it. Well, the thing is, it's not just clear cut, communism versus capitalism. And it's not just all about ideology, it's about colonialism, and it's about, business. And the thing is, Bill, there's only one guy that I think could say that Vietnam War was a success. And that's the guy that made the most money off of the Vietnam War. And that's our good friend, David Rockefeller, because he made huge profits in Vietnam, through investments in government contracts. Bell Helicopter. I mean, Bell Helicopter was bankrupt before the First National Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. They bought Bell out, and of course Rockefeller, controls that. And he made a ton of money. Bell Helicopter made a ton of money in Vietnam. Also through Standard Oil of California, Boeing, General Motors, company Brown and Root that you might have heard of that became Halliburton. I mean, he pumped money into there.
Yep.
I mean, and then in 1965, Rockefeller's Chase Manhattan Bank opened the branch in Saigon. And a major force behind the Vietnam War was Rockefeller's Southeast Asia Development Advisory Board, which gave a lot of reasons to Lyndon Johnson to get us into this mess. So Rockefeller was the guy that he profited the most from this war. But let's go over the history, Bill. Let's start right at the beginning.
All right.
So, you have the British, like usual, trying to colonize the world. And you also have the French and the Belgium, they were involved, colonizing, Africa, Asia. And actually, France's involvement, Bill, in this part of the world actually started off as a religious missionary movement, if you could believe that. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to convert the people in that area to Catholicism. And then what happened is the French start building factories, and then they started trade agreements. And then all of a sudden now you get into, business involvement. And then in the late 1850s, they attacked the province of Da Nang. And then from there, it spread all over Vietnam. So then it went into Laos, it went into Cambodia. And this is what became what's called the French Empire of Indochina. And that'll last until the French fall to the Germans in World War II. And then, of course, the Japanese come in and they fill that vacuum. And then after World War II, the Japanese, after the Japanese are defeated and the German and Hitler's defeated, then we go back to FDR did not want the French to go back to colonialism again. And he made it very clear after World War II, we don't want to go back to that garbage again. And what happens, Bill, is FDR dies. And then Truman takes over as president. He doesn't feel the same. And he basically lets the British take over again. And they allow the French to kind of piggyback on them. And then the British and Truman allow the French to kind of restart that government that they once had there. But the difference this time, Bill, is that now there's a rebellion, okay? And there's a rebellion by the Vietnamese, and it starts with Ho Chi Minh. And he was extremely dynamic. He got a lot of followers, because they did not want to go back under colonialism. And he got a lot of the young kids riled up, and, he became a national hero to the people over there. And the thing is,
Sean,
go ahead, Bill.
Who was Ho Chi Minh? And I know I've heard the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Well, Ho Chi Minh, Bill, is, I mean, if you ask Alan Dulles, he's the devil himself. But to the
Right.
people there, he was the one that started, he was the guy that started the rebellion. He started the rebellion in Vietnam, and he started the rebel forces. He gathered the forces together to fight the French. And they did not want to go back under colonialism. And they start fighting. And what happened, Bill, is Russia and China kind of stand by Ho Chi Minh. Now, they don't give him support at this point, monetarily or any equipment or anything like that, but they support him in words. And that's all you need to fire up somebody's hawks. So Dean Acheson, who was Truman's Secretary of State, he saw this as a move towards communism taking over the world. And that's where these guys get into,
Right.
The domino theory, Bill. Do you know what the domino theory is?
Yeah, one goes and then
they're talking. Yeah, they're saying if Saigon falls, then
Right.
That'll be the first step, and then communism will take over the world, Russia and China. And the thing is,
and eventually it would get to the United States.
Well, sure, but you look at Vietnam today, Bill. You got a Starbucks in Saigon, on every block. I mean,
right.
But the threat of communism then was pretty real, and but the thing is, the domino theory, it never really was the threat that they made it out to be, because Russia, China, and Ho Chi Minh were actually more rivals than they were, united in a cause. But it didn't matter, because that's not the perception presented by, the people that wanted war, like the Dulles brothers, And at this point, Bill, the Dulles brothers, they're not involved in the government right now. They would be in Sullivan and Cromwell law firm in representing, the 1%, but they were, their background was intelligence going back to the OSS in the State Department. But at this point, though, to them, they still have a lot of say in what's going on. And to them, they don't want to hear the word neutrality. Like, if you're siding in any way with the Russians, then you're against this. If you make a move, if they give you a compliment, whatever it is, all of a sudden, you know what I mean? You're our enemy. You're either with us or you're against us, and there's no in between.
Yeah.
So at this point, Bill, what happens is the French military begins to get funded by President Truman, and really by Dean Acheson, the Secretary of State, really was the guy who backed them. And they started sending money to France to help them in Vietnam. So right there, Bill, all these people that say, well, Kennedy's the first one that got us in their nonsense. Right here, you got Truman was really the first one to pump any money into Vietnam to support the French. So now what happens, we're up to like 1952, and Eisenhower becomes president, okay? So now Eisenhower's president, Nixon is his vice president, and he brings in the Dulles brothers. John Foster Dulles becomes Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles becomes head of the CIA. He'd be the longest running director of the CIA. And now the aid to the French increases dramatically, Bill. So now it's almost double what we're pumping into the France right now.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting thing. Ho Chi Minh actually at this point reaches out to the Dulles brothers, because he knows who the true power is, who's really running things. And he tells them, look, if you guys get the French the hell out of my country, he said, I'll be with you guys. I'll stand with you guys. He says, just get them the hell out of my country. But John Foster Dulles, he went to that extreme Cold War ideology where, he's a communist, and that's it. So Ho Chi Minh was the devil in the Dulles brothers' eyes. So now, at this point, the Dulles brothers started urging Eisenhower to get more involved. And at this point, Bill, we are financing 80% of the French war effort. Okay, do I have to repeat that? 80%.
That's insane.
Well, let's insert all the disinformation creatures right now that say JFK got us into Vietnam, because all those idiots, that say that, and all those people with that ignorant statement that they always try to throw in, Bill, that it's JFK is the one that got us in. Here you have, he's not even president. He's not even close to being president yet. Okay. We're still in the 50s, Bill. And we're back in 80% of the financing going into this war.
Mm-hmm.
And it got so bad over there, Bill, that the French are losing. They're losing this war. And the interesting thing is that Ho Chi Minh actually studied Michael Collins in the IRA. We just did a show on Northern Ireland.
Right. Yeah.
Michael Collins fought a guerrilla war against the British, and he was able to get the 26 counties free from British rule. And he did that using guerrilla tactics because he realized, their army's bigger than ours. This is the way we got to fight. And at this point, Bill, the French are losing so bad that they actually try to negotiate a way out of the war, if you can believe that. And Allen Dulles says, no way. And John Foster Dulles, no way you guys are getting out of this war.
Yeah.
We're footing the bill. We're paying you guys. You guys are staying in there, if you can believe that. So at this point, you see how entrenched we are in Vietnam, Bill?
Yeah. Well, how many, millions of dollars were pumped into the war effort there?
Well, it's that, and it's true. We're not only backing the French by giving them, money, 80% of the effort. A lot of Sullivan and Cromwell clients have business interest over there. So it's not just about the ideology. It's about, it's business interest that we have there. And at this point, where's JFK? So JFK is a young senator from Massachusetts, okay? And he's thinking about maybe down the line going to run for president. But he wants to get more involved in foreign affairs. So in the early 50s, he sets up a meeting to go to Saigon. And he meets with a diplomat named Edmund Gullion. Okay, now Gullion was very influential on Kennedy. And Kennedy met him a few times, and he was a really smart guy. And he'd end up bringing him into his administration later on. But Gullion is very, very, up on what's going on in the French war effort over there. And Kennedy meets with him in Saigon on a rooftop restaurant. And they're up there and they have dinner, a couple of drinks. And Kennedy says to him, he says, look, he says, can the French win this war? And Gullion says to him, there's no way the French could win this war. Ho Chi Minh has these young guerrilla soldiers of Vietnam so fired up that they would rather die, Bill, than go back under the thumb of colonialism. And he says, you can't fight a conventional war against a guerrilla army.
Yeah.
It's not like, World War II, where we know Hitler's got bunkers over here we could bomb, or you're talking about going into the jungles. And Kennedy understood this because Kennedy, was a veteran himself, Bill. He understood military affairs. And this always stuck with Kennedy, and this is where a lot of historians say, well, Kennedy was a Cold Warrior turned, or they say Kennedy was always a Cold Warrior. And this is where I agree with people like Lisa Pease and Jim D'Eugenio, where they say Kennedy's foreign policy was set at an early date. So by the time he goes into the White House, he knows where he stands. And this is always going to sit with him, that it's about colonialism. And he understands that, being Irish, he understands, what the British did in Ireland. So he understands colonialism. And he also understands, who are we liberating over there? Because one thing Gullion told him, Bill, is that, Ho Chi Minh is the backing of like 75% of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So if the people are backing him, who are we liberating? All right. So now we're up to 1954. Okay. And now you have the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Okay. And the French are losing this war really bad. I mean, they're trying to fight a guerrilla army with conventional warfare, and it's not working. And what they try to do is they try to pull the guerrilla forces out into the open. So they took over a valley in North Vietnam. And the idea was to get the guerrillas in the open and then use their air power. And what happened was the Vietnamese outsmarted them. using artillery that they got from the Russians, and they ambushed the French. So now Allen Dulles is proposing direct American involvement, okay, and using planes run by CIA pilots, plus giving them more weapons. And of course, this fails. So now Dulles plans Operation Vulture, okay, and it was more John Foster Dulles than Allen on this one. But what Operation Vulture was, Bill, was going to be 60 bombers, 150 air fighters, and 3 atomic bombs. I have to repeat that: 3 atomic bombs.
Oh my God.
Exactly, Bill. So Eisenhower refuses this. Now, he didn't refuse it because he was against it. He refused it because the British wouldn't back it. The British didn't want to do this. They didn't want to back it. So Eisenhower didn't want to do it alone. So he told Dulles, we're not doing this.
Wow.
So, yeah. So here's what Foster Dulles does, Bill. He goes behind Eisenhower's back. And Lisa talked about this in the previous interview we had with her, where, the Dulles brothers did a lot of things behind Kennedy's back, Eisenhower's back. And what John Foster did is he went privately to the French and he said, look it, we'll give you an atomic bomb and you're going to use it. And the French refused. They said, they said, we have our soldiers entrenched in the jungles in Vietnam, and we're going to drop bombs on them. We're going to kill our own soldiers.
Oh my God.
And at this point, it's important to note this, Bill, that Vice President Richard Nixon proposes to Eisenhower that we need to send in American ground troops. So now, Bill, this is 1954.
Yeah.
So all those people that say Kennedy got us in this shit, could we stop with that already? So I'm asking our listeners, if you hear that, I don't care if it's a historian, I don't care if it's a professor, I don't care if you went to Yale, Harvard, I don't care, if you're a history teacher, in high school history teacher, or you're a college professor and you're teaching kids that Kennedy got us into Vietnam, you're doing an injustice, Bill. At this point, there's and Nixon later on would say the same thing. Well, Kennedy and Johnson got us into this, and here's Nixon in 1954, wanting to get ground troops in, so enough with that, with that. So anyway, what happens, Bill, is they were so hell-bent on making sure that they didn't lose the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, but they do. The French lost. So what happens now is, we have the peace conference, okay, because the French lost, and now we have the peace conference. They have the peace conference in Switzerland, okay, and it's pretty obvious, Bill, that the United States is calling the shots, okay, and Allen Dulles, makes General Ed Lansdale the main guy in Vietnam. Now, we talked about General Ed Lansdale, okay?
Right. Yep.
On the episode where we mentioned Fletcher Proud, he said that Lansdale was in Dealey Plaza the day Kennedy was killed. Lansdale, Bill, was a Air Force general, but he was never really a military. He was CIA guy. He was a CIA guy in the military, and he was a marketing guy. I mean, Dulles plucked him out of a big marketing corporation, and he was like a magician. Like everything with him is propaganda. And what he does is he creates, there's no other way to say this, Ed Lansdale and the CIA creates this fake state of South Vietnam. And they prep up a puppet leader, and Lansdale would say later, he'll say, look, I was never asked to create a democracy there. I was asked to create a fascist state. And that's what I did when people start complaining about it.
Yeah.
And this is what he did. And how he did it, Bill, is by a propaganda machine. And he started spreading rumors that Ho Chi Minh was going to kill all the Catholics in Vietnam. And he started having the CIA help to move some of the Catholics that were in the north of Vietnam over to the south. Okay. And then he had this rigged election. And you want to talk about, everybody talks about rigged elections, Bill. This one was so ridiculous that, he basically, they put in Ziem and his brother. Okay. And what they did is they rigged this election so bad that they asked him, how much of the vote do you want to win? Lansdale says to Ziem. He says, "Oh, I want to win like 90%." And they did it. Like they had more people voting than were even in South Vietnam. Because at this point, Bill, like I said, South Vietnam is just a fake creation of the CIA. And 75% of the country is back in Ho Chi Minh. Okay. And the other problem with Ziem is that he was too Americanized. He spoke fluent English. He looked like an American. He dressed like an American. He was educated. And the thing is, he didn't appeal to the people over there like Ho Chi Minh did. And he didn't understand what they wanted was just to end colonialism, So now we're up to 1957. And what happens is Ho Chi Minh starts making war plans against this fake state of South Vietnam, that this resistance that, Dulles and the CIA created with at Lansdale. And then in 1958, the real fighting begins between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Okay. And what happens now is the U.S. starts to build up the military advisors. And they're first put there by Eisenhower and Nixon. So let's make that clear. When everybody wants to blame JFK, they're put there by these two guys, and they first put like 1,000 advisors there, and they put more in the region because we talked about this. Kennedy would later move some of the generals would actually move them over during Kennedy's time, and they would be counted towards Kennedy, but Eisenhower and Nixon actually put them there. So they put the advisors there. And what happens is, Bill, Ziem is totally out of control. I mean, he's capturing suspects, Bill, and he's putting them in the famous tiger cages. I don't know if you ever seen those tiger cages.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like sardines, Bill.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen it, portrayed in movies and shows and stuff like that.
And he's using the guillotine and all kind of vicious. I mean, this is the guy we're backing. So what happens, Bill, is we're getting up to the 1960 election now. Okay. And you can see that Vietnam is already a mess. We are entrenched in Vietnam. We've been back in the French effort. The French lose. We kind of take over. And then the CIA with Ed Lansdale creates this fake state of Vietnam. And we built up a resistance to fight Ho Chi Minh. And this is where Kennedy's at when he comes into office. And, there's all kind of problems that Kennedy's having coming into office. He's got issues in Cuba. We know what happens with the Bay of Pigs. The Cold War with Russia. We know what happens to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. Yeah.
He's got problems in Laos, Berlin. We know what's going to happen with the Berlin Wall. So as bad as Vietnam is right now, it's kind of low on Kennedy's priority list, But when Kennedy wins the election, the first thing that Lansdale does is he immediately suggests that we send in U.S. ground troops, okay? Because the South is losing. And this is what he portrays to Kennedy. And, at this point, he has a dozen advisors keep telling him, we need to send in ground troops. We need to send in ground troops. And Kennedy's just not having it because, again, it goes back to that discussion that he had with Gulliam. He understands that this is about colonialism. We can't win a ground war like this. We can't win a fighting a conventional army against a guerrilla army. Okay. So there's a lot of pressure to send in ground troops. And Kennedy understands this. And this is important, Bill, because what happens now is JFK does increase the amount of advisors. Okay. And the point of doing this, though, and this is what people don't understand, and this is where all the people say, well, Kennedy got us in by doing this. The point was to train the resistance, okay, so they could take over the battle themselves. Like Kennedy said, it's their war. They're the ones that have to win it or lose it. So he's not sending ground troops. He's sending advisors to train South Vietnam to fight the battle. But imagine this, Bill. Imagine if Kennedy just came in and he pulled everybody out. Okay, pulled out the advisors that were already there that Nixon and Eisenhower put, and then the resistance was crushed. he would have got it crushed in the media, and the same people that said he got us into Vietnam would be hammering him about being
Right.
soft on communism, and he,
Yep.
he created this, and he left all those people to die, and this and that. And the thing is, to be honest with you, Bill, increasing the advisors at this point was the right move by Kennedy, because sometimes being a president is picking the best of 6, 7 bad options.
Right. Yeah.
And this was his best option at the time. So now, Billy, JFK at this point is, considering what his move is. He wants to start withdrawing these advisors and start letting the South Vietnamese fight the war, and whatever happens, and we'll deal with the government that's standing at the end. But at this point, it's very clear to me. I don't know why historians have such a hard time with this. It's very clear that JFK's policy is set. He's not putting in combat troops. He's not backing off that. There's just no way he's putting in combat troops. So what he does now is he gets a hold of Galbraith, his ambassador to India, who was on board with Kennedy's way of thinking and foreign policy of, these countries are nationalists. These leaders are nationalists. All they want is to run their own country. They want to be out from the thumb of colonialism. So he has Galbraith write a report on sending in combat troops, because he knows that Galbraith is dead set against that. And this is what Kennedy wants. And Kennedy was a master of doing this with his advisors. And then he has another report coming from 2 of his other advisors, Walt Rastow and General Maxwell Taylor, who he put in as head of the Joint Chief of Staff after he got rid of Leominster. And we talked about why he pushed Leominster out, after Operation Nordwoods. And he knows the report that's going to come from Rastow and Taylor are going to be recommending troops. Okay. So what he does is he tells Galbraith, he says, take your report and give it to McNamara, Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense.
Right.
And he says, tell McNamara, this is what I want. Now, McNamara is an interesting character, Bill, because, at this point, earlier on, he would recommend to Kennedy, we should send in 200,000 combat troops. But at this point, he's going to become Kennedy's go-to guy for the withdrawal process, because McNamara was always like a number 2. Like he's going to go along. He would later become a hawk under Lyndon Johnson, because he knew that's what the president wanted. So now he knows the president wants to withdraw, and he's got this report from Galbraith. So now McNamara got this in his hand, and he starts writing it up. So what they do, Bill, is there's a SecDef conference, okay, with all the advisors, and they're recommended, a lot of advisors are recommending combat troops. And Kennedy, this is where we talked about NSAM 263. What Kennedy does is he has Fletcher Prouty and Victor Krulak, General Victor Krulak of the Marine Corps, write up a report recommending the withdrawal of 1,000 advisors a month, starting in December 63, with the end result of all U.S. personnel out by 1965. And he has his brother Bobby supervising the report. So this is all being directed by JFK, and he was a master of doing this. And it's making it look like it's coming from his advisors, and he's just going to agree with it, but he's directing all the traffic. So it's not an NSAM officially yet. It's an NSAM at the secret level, okay, where we're going to withdraw these troops. But what happens is there's a leak, and somebody leaks it to the New York Times. So once it's out there, and the New York Times puts a report, oh, Kennedy's withdrawn, and then they slammed him actually that, he's soft on communism. One of National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy, says to Kennedy, it's already out there. You might as well just put it on paper. So they put it on paper, and officially becomes NSAM 263, okay, which is Kennedy's withdrawal policy. And we talked about this on the first episode of a JFK. It's being fully implemented, okay, and the advisors are getting put in a position to start pulling out, and we're going to start to to give the South Vietnamese resistance everything they need to fight the war themselves. Okay, and here's what happens now is there's a coup attempt against Diem and his brother, and both of them would end up being assassinated. And this is where historians, again, want to blame JFK and say that he approved of this plot. And there's absolutely no evidence in that there's no evidence at all that JFK approved of this plot. What happened, Bill, is Diem is losing, really, like, he's losing the war, okay, and he's losing the people, the control of the people. They don't want him. He's really, at this point, he's a loose cannon. We talked about the tiger cages, all he's doing. So there's a plot that's hatched inside the State Department, okay, to get rid of Diem and his brother. And one of their allies is the ambassador to Vietnam, Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a rival of Kennedy. Kennedy put him in that position, but he wasn't happy with what he's doing, and he wanted to get rid of him, and he's going to bring in Edmund Gulliam. That was his plan after Dallas. Okay, but what happens here is that the State Department kind of conned JFK. They tell him that all his advisors agree on this plan, okay? And they say, and they do this when all of the advisors are out at different places. They're at different locations. They're not at the White House. And they say, you know, all of these advisors approve of this, and we want to give an ultimatum to Diem that he either gets rid of his brother and replaces him, or we're going to have him replaced, okay? And what happens is Henry Cabot Lodge doesn't do this. He doesn't go and tell Diem this, but he goes to the generals that are already disgusted, the South Vietnamese generals that are disgusted with Diem and want to overthrow him. And he tells them that, look, the president is thinking about getting rid of Diem. Okay. And that's not true. That's not true. Kennedy was worried about what's going on over there, but, you know, he did not approve of this. And when he says when they said get rid of, Bill, they didn't say to Kennedy, we're going to assassinate him. What they said is, you know, because remember, this is a fake state. They rigged the election. Mm-hmm. We're just going to put another puppet in there, is how they said it to him, you know? So what happens is JFK finds out about this, and he slams his desk, and he said, this bullshit has to stop. He says, this is out of control. He says, we're going to cancel this order. He says, we're not going to do this. We're absolutely not going to do this. But what happens is the generals go ahead with this anyway, Bill, the South Vietnamese generals. And it's clear now from the cable traffic that Henry Cabot Lodge was talking to Diem, and he was also talking to a CIA agent, Lucien Conein, okay? And he's going to come up in the Watergate. He was working with the plumbers trying to get disinformation on Kennedy, you know, and he was working with Conein, and Conein was working with the South Vietnamese generals to overthrow Diem. So what happens is Diem and his brother are assassinated. They're slaughtered and murdered, and they're killed. This is 2 weeks before Dallas. Okay. Now, I have information I'm looking into tying that plot through the CIA to the Chicago plot to assassinate JFK. Because remember, we talked about that. Right. That plot, the timing is perfect, Bill. And the patsy in that plot, Thomas Arthur Valet, he has military experience. He has ties to the Vietnamese situation here. So I'm looking into that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but that's something I'm definitely looking into. But you can see, Bill, the plot here was coming from the State Department, it was coming from Cabot Lodge, and it's coming from the CIA. And the important thing to understand with the CIA, Bill, is Lucien Conein is a foot soldier. So he's getting his orders. He don't take orders from Cabot Lodge or the State Department. He's getting his orders from inside the CIA. And at this point, you know, Allen Dulles has already, you know, been fired by Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs. So Richard Helms is deputy director of plans, which is like the number 3 position in the CIA. John McCone has taken over, a Republican businessman Kennedy put in as head of the CIA, but he's just a figurehead at this point. He didn't have any intelligence experience, and nobody's listening to him. Helms is running the show. So the order from Conein had to come from somebody like Helms. Coneen's not a guy, he's a foot soldier. He's not a guy calling shots.
Right. Yeah.
You know? So right now, Bill, we're up to about, we're a couple weeks out from Dallas. Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
So, the point that everybody's got to understand is that by the time Kennedy got into office, we are already entrenched in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a plan that was set from this first meeting with Gulliam in the early 50s, when he told them, you can't win a guerrilla war there. And it's about colonialism. It's not about, we're not liberating anybody over there. And Kennedy understood that, and his policy is set.
Yeah.
When he goes into office, but he's handed a mess. He's handed a mess everywhere. And the thing is, when he had put in extra advisors that were already there, he just added more advisors. It was the best of 6 or 7 bad options that he had.
Right.
He didn't put, I agree with him. He had to put in the advisors. And it also got the military off his back, because they want him to put in Bill, they want to drop atomic bombs.
Huh.
This is going back to the 50s.
Unbelievable.
So it's unbelievable, Bill.
And Sean, when you think about it, Kennedy is fending off war
Everywhere.
on so many fronts.
So many fronts, Bill. He walks right into the Bay of Pigs that's already been started, by the CIA. Dulles lies to him about that whole operation. He's got problems in Berlin, which Kennedy always felt Berlin was the key issue, way more serious than Vietnam.
Yeah.
If Germany fell to the communists, he always felt that was a major issue. And he's got problems. We also talked, as soon as he walked into office, he has problems in the Congo, because Dulles already had Patrice Lumumba assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And Kennedy's trying to negotiate to get him back in power. And here Dulles already had him whacked. So Kennedy's got problems everywhere. He's got problems in Laos. The Cold War is at an all-time high.
Yep.
There's the threat of nuclear war. And then you got all these hawks in the background, and you got Rockefeller making a ton of money, in Vietnam. They got interest in that part of the world. And we're going to see that it's just going to continue. And the other thing that the key point of that is, all the way back to the 50s, Richard Nixon is already recommending combat troops.
Mm-hmm.
So remember that when you hear him say, oh, Kennedy got us into it.
Right. Yep. Oh boy.
Yeah, what a mess, Bill. But again, you got to remember, Bill, protest the war, but don't protest the soldiers.
Right. Of course.
They're heroes, buddy.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it was just we're going to get into detail about, how it ripped this country apart, and, the damage it did over there. The damage that was done over there was just unbelievable. The numbers, Bill, I got some updated numbers I'm going to say in the next episode.
Yeah.
From some medical studies that were done that are way different from what the State Department and the Defense Department said was the casualties in Vietnam. It was way higher than they said. So amazing stuff, buddy.
Yeah. Well, we'll, make sure you guys are listening and tune in to our next episode as we continue to talk through Vietnam and so many more of these just incredible historical events that I don't think, I think as the years go on, we start to think less and less about them. Obviously, there's so many things that have happened in our lifetime to talk about as well, but we definitely we don't want to lose sight of these things, Sean.
But you got to remember, Bill, this event, defined the nation for really a period of like 20 years when you think about it. The damage it did to the country. And we're going to get into the anti-war movement and the ripped at the seams. It was almost like there was a civil war at home while the boys were over there fighting,
Yeah, and how it intersected and really, in many ways, even added fuel to the fire of the civil rights movement.
Sure, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because Martin Luther King gets involved.
Yeah,
Martin Luther King starts to speak out against the Vietnam War.
Yep.
And that's where Johnson really turns on him.
Yeah,
and that's where Martin Luther King, becomes a threat to the national security structure.
And Muhammad Ali as well.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
So much to talk about, Bill. So much to talk about, buddy. We
Yeah.
didn't even get on Lion Linden yet, buddy. So we got a lot to the next episode. We'll go into more detail, buddy. But the first, I hope everybody got the point. Next time you hear somebody, and I don't care if it's a professor, I don't care if it's a history teacher, you hear him say Kennedy got into Vietnam, say, well, how do you explain Operation Vulture? Because Kennedy wasn't even close to being president at that point.
Yep.
These guys want to drop atomic bombs. I mean, come on. And then you blame Kennedy.
Amazing.
All right, buddy.
Sean, let's wrap it up. So everybody, make sure you are subscribed everywhere we are. Make sure you hit the notification button, you hit the subscribe, you give us a rating, you give us a review, and we appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with us here at the show, we are at that'senoughoutofoushow@gmail.com. Sean, great job.
All right, buddy. Thank you, pal.
All right. That's enough out of you.
Good night, everybody.